The subject of today's video is one of the best transport vehicles of all time, and one of the best ships in general of the Clone Wars era. I'm Joey from Radio Free Coruscant, and this is the Acclamator. Design. The Rothama Heavy Engineering Acclamator-class Transgalactic military assault ship was a fairly straightforward design. It resembled a smaller version of the Venator-class Star Destroyer introduced alongside it, with a similar arrowhead shape, relatively long tail, and tall command tower. It had 3 large landing gear and 2 boarding ramps that could retract into its underside, and it could also make water landings if necessary. I'm not sure if it possessed the ability to deploy boats or submarines in this state, but it wouldn't surprise me. Internally, the ship was a miracle of logistics rivaling its separatist equivalent, the C-9979 landing craft. The Acclamator was much larger and did not require nearly as complicated a mechanism to store and deploy its embarked craft, but they were still densely packed. LAATs were mounted to tracks running along the ceiling of its main hangars, with ATTEs in similar sub-bays in front of that, and SBHAs towards the nose of the ship. Vehicles and cargo could be deployed through the side boarding ramps or through a small ventral drop bay. There was also an additional logistics hangar at the top of the ship for visiting shuttles and supply craft. Most of the ship's habitable decks were in the superstructure and upper portion of the main hull, with the remainder of its interior being consumed by the storage facilities, power plants, and fuel. At the rear of the ship were its 4 sublight engines and long tail. The engines were equipped with electromagnetic thrust vectoring panels to direct their exhaust streams and help steer the ship. The tail housed several important components. At its base, it had a neutrino radiator grill for cooling its power systems. Along the tail's length, it had tensor field and inertial compensator field generators to help maintain its structural integrity. And finally, the ship's hyperdrive generator was located at the tip of the tail. The ship was clad in neutronium-impregnated armor and was very highly shielded as well. In-universe, the Acclamator's designers were unknown, but in real life it was designed by Ryan Church, Doug Chiang, and John Goodson as far as I can tell. Several other artists also contributed concept designs that did not end up being used for the final product. Specifications. The Acclamator measured 752 meters long by 460 meters wide and 183 meters tall in flight, or 200 meters tall with the landing gear deployed. It was incredibly fast for its size, with a top atmospheric speed of 1200 kilometers per hour and an almost unheard of Class 0.6 hyperdrive with a 250,000 light-year range, one of the fastest and farthest-reaching hyperdrives ever installed in a mass-produced vessel, especially one of this size. The ship was armed with 12 quad turbolaser turrets, 24 point defense light laser cannons, and 4 heavy munitions launch tubes with a capacity of 100 high-yield proton torpedoes or 20 assault concussion missile launchers each. The ship required a crew of 700 and could carry 16,000 passengers, including clone troopers and support personnel. More importantly, though, it could carry a tremendous amount of cargo. 320 speeder bikes, such as BARC speeders, 74Z speeder bikes, or possibly ATRTs, 66 standard LAATIs, 14 LAATC tank carriers, 48 ATTEs, 14 LAATC tank carriers, 48 ATTEs, 36 SBHAs, and 11,250 tons, or 200,000 cubic meters, of additional miscellaneous cargo. All of that speed and carrying capacity came in at a steep cost of 29 million credits. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if the entire stated embarked craft complement of the Acclamator would actually fit in it. When I made my video on the C-9979 and the animations therein of all its embarked craft on display in front of it, several commenters wished that I had actually tried to fit them all into its hull. I had been planning to, but trying to maneuver them all into position to see if it would work would have been too difficult and time-consuming. And unfortunately, I can't do that this time either, because just placing all 484 vehicles made Blender want to cry, and if I tried positioning them all within the hull, I would want to cry as well. I already had to leave out the bark speeders in the final animation because it would have taken like 7 hours to render otherwise, so a more complex animation here would not have been doable. But we can see from the sheer volume of everything laid out in front of it that they would have had to be packed in almost impossibly tightly to fit. The LAATs and ATTEs could have probably been stacked on top of each other, and of course the not pictured speeder bikes definitely would have been stacked several high, but when you consider that it also needs living quarters for nearly 17,000 people, as well as a large cargo bay, fuel tanks, maintenance facilities, a reactor, and other various mechanical components to make the ship go, it begins to strain credulity. However, I did use Blender to calculate the volume for each item, and it seems like it could be possible. Assuming the automatic volume calculation for each item is correct, the LAATIs would take up 10,100 cubic meters, the LAATCs would need 1,800, SPHAs 120,600, ATTEs 4,700, and the bark speeders 200 cubic meters, rounded to the nearest hundred. That gives us a total of 137,200 cubic meters of embarked craft. Add on 200,000 cubic meters of cargo, and we get 337,000. We've never seen the crew or passenger quarters of an Acclamator as far as I know, but the minimum size for them would probably have to be around 65 cubic meters per person, for a total of almost 1.1 million cubic meters of living space. The Acclamator itself seems to have a total volume of around 9.6 million cubic meters, so it does seem promising, but not all of that space is usable. Based on its official cross-section, we can subtract around 3 million cubic meters of equipment such as the reactors, landing gear wells, neutrino radiators, etc. The engines are at least 600,000 cubic meters, the conning tower 85,000, and the logistics hangar probably around 45,000. That leaves us with 5.5 million cubic meters of potential usable space. We will deduct another 3 million cubic meters for things I can't account for, like armor, decks, bulkheads, etc., and maybe another 500,000 for logistics equipment like the overhead rails for the LAATs, leaving us with a realistic storage volume of 2 million cubic meters. With at least 1.5 million cubic meters of living space, cargo, and embarked craft, that still leaves us with 500,000 left over, meaning that it does genuinely seem plausible that the Acclamator could carry everything it is supposed to. It probably wouldn't look the way it does in the cross-section or the interior scenes of the Clone Wars, with so much breathing room around the ships, but it is theoretically possible. You'd probably only need to reduce its carrying capacity by 25 to 50% to get an interior that looks like what we see in the book and show. History. The story of the Acclamator was short but highly effective. The ship was commissioned in secret with most of the rest of the Republic Navy just before the Clone Wars, and entered service just in time for at least 12 to participate in the Battle of Geonosis. The ship's performance there was such a resounding success that the Republic ordered 1,000 more Acclamators, and used them as their primary transports throughout the war. Acclamators were present for such major operations as the battles of Munilinst, Mon Calamari, Ryloth, Christophsis, Teth, Geonosis again, Seleucami, Camino, Sullust, Umbara, and more. Following the Clone Wars, most Acclamators were decommissioned, but they were still used in limited numbers by the Galactic Empire. They served as warships and military transports in remote areas of the Outer Rim where Star Destroyers and other new warships weren't worth the cost, and some were used to transport large numbers of enslaved people to and from Imperial penal colonies. Some also had their weaponry and vehicle handling equipment removed to convert them into generic cargo ships. Some Acclamators also fell out of the Empire's control and into the hands of various other groups. At least one was used by the Rebel Alliance, and several ended up serving the Zon Consortium and other criminal organizations. Imperial remnants made some use of them as well, with one being used by Admiral Dalla as late as 44 ABY. And that is everything there is to know about the Acclamator-class assault ship. Let me know what you think of this cult classic design, and what other ships you'd like to see covered in the future. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week. RFC, out.